This is a bonus episode for the Change Underground. It's all about buckwheat from my sister podcast, Regen Earth, that I co-host with Rich Bowden. Episode 250 of the big announcement will be happening next week. I've had a little bit of IT issues this week. So in the meantime, enjoy the gentle art of understanding buckwheat. And we'll see you next week.
Hello and welcome to Season 4, Episode 2 of Regen Earth, where we look for regenerative farming tips that you can use in your own backyard. Now this week we're going to focus on buckwheat as a backyard crop. It's not something that normally springs straight to mind when you plan out your veggie patch, but it can be very useful indeed, as you'll hear John say. Now speaking of John, I can see my friend, regen farmer, author and podcaster, lowering himself gingerly into the chair there at Highclere Farm, and that's in beautiful northwestern Tassie. Hello, John. How's everything on the farm?
Well, gingerly is the word, Rich. We're been busy since we got that 5.5 inches of rain about 4 weeks back. Getting everything in ready for it's like the autumn break came early. So we've been planting like 400 possessed men. There's muscles I've forgotten I'd had, but lactic acid will remind you. So yeah, so it's a busy but satisfying time of the year.
A farmer's life, eh? All right, John, as I said, this week's episode is on buckwheat. So I wonder if you can share with the listeners what buckwheat is exactly and the interesting way you're using it on the Highclere Farm.
Yeah, sure. It's an odd thing, buckwheat. You hear the word wheat and you think grain and cereal. It's sold as a grain. It's not actually related to any of the wheat or rye or any of the other grasses. So it's also gluten-free for that purpose. Mind you, so is sweet corn, but it's a grass. So it's related to sorrel, knotweed and rhubarb of all things. It grows about 2 foot tall, maybe 3, depending on how soon you get it in. It's definitely a summer crop. It's extraordinarily frost sensitive. The cooler the summer, the better it seems to go. So, and it's a broad leaf, heart-shaped leaves on it.
Okay.
It's a wonderful thing, yeah. What do we use it for? It's a really quick ground cover. It gets through its cycle depending on who you read and what season you get, in between sort of 6 and 10 weeks. So it'll cover the ground really quickly, suppresses weeds, and it has huge numbers of these little white flowers, which are great for bees and pollinators of all sorts and attracting beneficial insects. Now, I haven't had a look underneath yet, but apparently it's good for loosening topsoil and rejuvenating low-fertility soils.
Is that right?
And it has apparently a way of, concentrating the phosphorus and making it available for the next crop. So we'll see what happens.
That's fantastic. You say, John, that it's a summer crop.
Yeah.
But you're in northwestern Tassie. What about people in other climate zones? Can they grow it year-round?
So if you don't have a frost, I would imagine you could probably chuck it in along the coast somewhere up the mainland.
Okay.
And once you got above, I don't know, Taree maybe.
Righto.
Somewhere like that, you could along the coast, you could grow it, yeah. And I was reading when I was looking for some information on processing the seeds. A lady threw it in, was going to get back to it, and it flowered, went to seed, and then regrew from its own seed.
Yes.
So by the time she got to it, it was onto its third crop for that summer.
Oh, word.
In the same spot, yeah. So she planted it in this part of a garden that she wasn't going to be able to get to straight away, and life intervened, and so she just left it. And she brought lots of bees. The soil seemed to improve with each crop. So
it's value for money, obviously. John?
There are drawbacks, though. I mean, with wheat and sweet corn and barley and things.
Okay.
When it's ripe, it's ripe. the whole head's right,
Yep.
everything comes out together. Whereas buckwheat tends to be, it ripens from one end of the flower spray to the other.
Yes.
So, and if you wait till the last one's ripened, the first ones are falling out. So they reckon about 3/4 ripe is the time to hit it before you start losing them to the soil. But I mean, that's a bit of a drawback, but it's not the end of civilization on a small scale.
And you mentioned, John, just a minute ago about it does attract beneficial insects. That includes native bees, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. I was surprised. We've got bumblebees here in Tasmania, the only state in Australia with them, and they're delightful things to have about. And then there's the honeybees, and I noticed both of them on it. But these tiny sort of, I don't know, 7 mils long little bees,
Yeah.
Natives, all over them. And the flowers are really tiny anyway, so maybe that's what attracts them. But yeah, they were all over it. Plus hoverflies and sort of predatory insects and whatnot. They've got to get their sugar from somewhere to go hunting, I guess. So
Yeah.
they're all over it.
So not only with the native bees, you are they great pollinators, of course, but you're providing a food source for them, aren't you?
Yeah, because it grows sort of from last frost to first frost, it's possible to have flowers sort of all year if you were keeping bees or there were bees nearby or you wanted beneficials. Yeah, I'm not sure what buckwheat honey is like, because I'm not sure we grow that much of it now. Like I said before, the ability to concentrate phosphorus was one of the big selling points of using it as a cover crop.
Yep.
Prior to the introduction of chemical fertilisers. That and the drawback with harvesting sort of means on a commercial scale there's not quite as much grown. Well, probably 5-10% of what was grown prior to 1950, I guess.
Okay.
But I think it's time for a comeback.
Would you put it in a regenerative system?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, that's what we're trying to do. Given where we are and the dry spells we get for anywhere between 6 and 12 weeks over summer, because we're in a Mediterranean climate, and buckwheat doesn't seem to need an awful lot of water or moisture to get it started. And I didn't actually plant anything or sow it, I just broadcast it over the top. So the germination rates would probably be much better if we put some soil on top of it or did some, what do they call it, direct drilling. And we've still got a whole lot of it that fills out the space. And the idea, big fan of Masanobu Fukuoka. Yeah, he grew rice in the same patch for, 30-odd years, or something like that, alternating it with a different winter grain on the same spot. And he was able to grow soil. So my thinking was we'll grow buckwheat for our summer crop, possibly even get 2 crops off if it's a good year.
Yes.
And barley, wheat, oats or spelt as the alternative in winter and just rotate through those. But we'll see.
I think you mentioned last week, sorry John, I was going to say, I think you mentioned last week that you were going to use peas as following, was that right, or was that be before buckwheat?
Possibly thinking about peas as because peas can be treated as a grain as well.
Yeah.
Field peas, and you just harvest them like ordinary, like with a scythe and thresh them out to get the dried green peas, and then put the straw back on. So that maybe fitting that in as a third crop between the first buckwheat, then peas, because it never gets too hot here for peas in summer, or rarely, and then follow that up with a winter grain, which stays in the ground till early spring, late spring. So,
okay,
the more rotations we in, but basically as long as we keep the ground covered and something photosynthesising, we're rebuilding soil.
Okay, yep.
And that's the whole point of being regenerative, because the way to build soil is to add carbon to it, and that can be mycelia or dead roots or or droppings or there's as many ways as there are people doing it.
Okay. just taking it a step further, John, what about cooking with buckwheat? I know you've tried your hand at it. How'd you go?
Yeah, well, well, that was part of the reason for doing it. I mean, we could just leave it and sort of slash it before it was ready to harvest. But it seemed a shame not to actually save some of the seed anyway to replant for next year. So that way we're acclimatising and settling into the local area. But no, I like the idea of actually using the buckwheat itself because it's gluten-free. It's good for people with celiacs and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But I actually had about 2 kilos of seed left over. Now, the seed itself's an interesting thing because here in Tassie, I couldn't use my usual supplier, which is Eden Seeds up in Queensland, because of quarantine reasons.
Yep.
And we all understand about quarantine nowadays without having to explain it. And they're not allowed to send it to WA either. So there's obviously some sort of disease of either buckwheat or one of the things it's related to.
Yes.
It's on the eastern seaboard. So what I did was I went to the local health food shop. Said, you got any whole buckwheat? Yeah, how much would you like? It was somewhat more expensive that way, but it is organic. So I was certain of what the seed was and it was healthy.
Okay.
And so I had 2 kilos. Yeah, adapt, improvise, overcome. It's always a way.
All right, that sounds fantastic. What about the pancakes? What was the acid test there?
Well, I've got a grade mill. I ran them through. Extraordinary simple recipe, just buckwheat flour, sugar, baking powder rather, milk and egg and some melted butter. And it was heavenly, Rich. I didn't add anything to them except a little bit of butter afterwards because I wanted to actually taste the pancake themselves, not any particular topping I put on it. And I had two or three, I think, the first morning. And it wasn't until after afternoon tea that I realised I hadn't had lunch and was now starting to feel hungry. So they're low GI apparently, and maybe that's what that was about. But I was certainly full all day, and we were working fairly flat out too.
They must be high in fibre. Would that be correct?
I imagine so, particularly if you don't. So they call it black wheat in Russia and Ukraine and places like that because they grind it with the husk on, which is the black coating of each of and they're called groats in each seed. Yes. Yeah. So I suspect if you do it with the husk on, it's going to have a lot more fibre. You can also make a porridge out of it. It's just too heavy for me.
Yeah.
But I was surprised at how light and fluffy these pancakes were and how well they kept me going all day. I mean, it's not data I'm providing there. It's an anecdote, but it's something to perhaps think about and maybe do some more reading on.
That sounds fantastic.
But, yeah, no, I recommend them. I reckon
you've probably got a lot of people interested. So you recommend a local health food shop if you're in one of the perhaps quarantine states, Western Australia or Tasmania, but Eden Seeds was your supplier on the mainland. Is that correct?
It was, yeah. And I've never had bad seeds from Eden Seeds.
No, I don't think I have either. They're fantastic. And we
have no relationship with
financially linked to
I do have a financial relationship with them. I give them money and they give me seeds. I send money and they send seeds. It works well for them.
Yeah, of course.
It works very well for them. And not everything from there can't be sent to Tassie.
Okay.
Now, I can get corn from there to Tassie, but they still can't send it to WA because they've got some quarantine arrangement with Biosecurity Tasmania or something. But, yeah, even if you're not on the eastern seaboard, have a look because there are some things that aren't subject to quarantine.
Okay, and it has always been strict in Tasmania. I remember growing up there, and they make sure that and rightly so, they make sure that diseases on the mainland aren't transferred as much as possible to Tasmania being an island. All right, John, that's a great overview of the benefits of planting buckwheat. After the break, I'll be asking John to talk a little bit more about how he's integrating buckwheat into his ChangeUnderground growing system. And this is one that you can adopt on your farm or small holding, or even in your backyard. We'll be back with a little bit more detail after the break. Okay, John, you've given listeners an excellent outline of buckwheat and its benefits. So now I'd like you to go into a little bit of detail about systems, about how you use it in your no-dig ChangeUnderground.
The ChangeUnderground is the name I gave to the no-dig gardening system we came up with, I don't know, 12 years ago or so. And the Fukuoka part is a system developed by a Japanese fella Masanobu Fukuoka. He's got a book out there. If you type in onestrawrevolution.pdf, there's free copies of it, and I would recommend it for everyone. It's a book that changed my life, and there aren't many that do that. And I had a crack at it when we were down on the Monero, his grain growing system, which perhaps I should give a light outline of for people that aren't familiar with it. So in his circumstances, he had clover growing in a rice paddy field. And into that he would broadcast rice seed, and then he would flood the field like they do with rice growing, but only for 5 days to a week to knock the clover back, and then he'd drain it and just keep the soil moist, and the rice would grow up, and by the time the rice was established, the clover couldn't smother it when it came back. Now, just before he harvested the rice, he then oversowed it, broadcasting millet or barley or wheat or one of the winter grains. Now, he recommends rolling them up in little clay balls to do that so that the birds don't get it. We'll be doing experiments with and without.
That's simple ideas, but they're fantastic, aren't they? Seed balls.
Yeah, it's using nature to do nature's work. Yeah,
exactly, yes.
Yeah. So once he'd sown the barley, let's say, he'd wait 2 weeks, go in, harvest the rice, thresh it, and then toss everything that was left over back on the paddy. Now, he said, being Japanese, the first couple of years it didn't work because he tried to do it neatly in straight lines.
Yes.
So it looked like a Zen garden of raked rice stems. But after that, he just decided just to throw it around and see what would happen. And by not having a pattern to it, it actually grew much better. And then once the rice is at a certain height, I think about 5 or 6 inches, he said maybe a little bit less, and or the barley, he'd run ducks over it to get them to nibble back and make the plants throw out side shoots called tillers. And they'd do a little bit of fertilising, and then that would be it. Leave it alone for 6 months or however long until the next crop's ready. And he just continually sowed before he harvested, and then sowed before he harvested, and so on for 20, 30 years, something like that. And grew soil just in his paddy. And he leased off a neighbour, followed the same system, and every time the rice came up, it got hammered with a disease called blast. And he couldn't work out why, so he went and spoke when the stuff on his place was doing okay. And the neighbour said, that's right, I tossed out all my chicken poo during winter. So it was over-fertilised and was pushing things along too fast, which made the plant soft and subject to attack. There's so much more to it, and he goes into it in his book, but basically to use the system, you sow before you harvest.
That's working with nature, isn't it, John, instead of against it?
Yeah, and it's keeping the ground covered, making use of all available photosynthesis opportunities, and it gives a chance for the new crop to connect to the mycorrhiza of the old crop, I would imagine.
Okay.
That's a thought that just occurred to me, so don't quote me on that one, but it's an idea worth looking into, I think. So, yeah. So, basically where we are, it's a cropping, it's a grazing area with some small areas of cropping here and there. Potatoes are big, and oats, but mainly as feed. Because of the rainfall we get here and the fact that most of it's not flat, it's best used for grazing. So getting the soil ready to plant vegetables in would mean years of smothering it in mulch before it was ready. Whereas the growing grains,
yes,
it's a variation on the paddock, on the pasture paddock. And I've been favouring the clovers as we work through it, so that they're still growing in amongst the grain. And the buckwheat was something that just kept hammering at me to go and do.
Okay.
I heard myself thinking about it 4 or 5 times before I finally worked out how to get some seed. So I'm not built to grow 100,000 lettuce a year anyway, which is, you see people how to make $100,000 on an acre and a half, and it's really, and I don't think if you're not enjoying growing it, there's no point growing it. We've got a small veggie patch, 10 by 10 metres, which is enough for the house, and leftovers and whatnot for the stock. But I think the place is better used in this Fukuoka grain experiment, just so we can show people it can be done outside Japan for a start, or more particularly here in Tassie, or other places in Australia too, I would imagine it works, because I did it on the Monero, as I was saying, with barley and rye.
Okay.
And then we moved after the second one, so I didn't get to do it anymore. But it's doable. Whether or not you'd go all the way to collecting seed if you're doing it in a garden, maybe not. It certainly wouldn't hurt to use it just as a cover crop.
Yes.
To absorb the phosphorus, which apparently there's a shortage of phosphorus because most of the artificial stuff is not available to plants anyway. Once it's sprayed on, it's still got to be treated, interact with soil biota before it becomes available. So and you need phosphorus for flowering, I think it is. It's either flowering or root development. Nitrogen's for growth, and the P's for one and the K's for the other. But so it's a useful thing to have, particularly if you're growing peas, like I was saying. You're following it with that way, you then get your nitrogen. So just let it do what it's got to do. Actually, happy to plant them just in garden borders around the front yard. They look that nice as flowers, and that attract bees and beneficial insects and whatnot. And they look very pretty, and masses of white flowers everywhere.
How did the chooks and ducks go with it?
They're being kept well away from it.
Yep. Okay.
At the moment.
Yep.
Because I had a how can I put this? A moment of setback. I've got a fenced off area with the fruit in, and one duck managed to find a weakness in the fence line, and in about 15 seconds it stripped all the new blueberry tree bushes of their blueberries.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so since then I'm keeping a very tight rein on where things go. It might be worth testing. I'm not sure, not being a grain, whether or not, I think they're a dicot, so they come up with 2 leaves.
Yeah. As
opposed to grass, which comes up with 1. So grasses and anything else that's a monocot, 1 leaf, you can graze because it keeps growing from the bottom. Whereas dicots put up 2 leaves and grow from the outer edges, which means that if you bite the top off, like if you cut clover, it tends to die back. Whereas if you cut grass, it keeps growing. So, no, I'd keep the chooks away from it and just save some grain for them.
Okay. So it sounds like you do recommend it for backyards,
just
as a cover sort of
only
crop?
for a test, just as a test, even just to have it about.
And listeners could always try your fantastic pancakes.
The pancake recipes and whatnot. Yeah, hopefully we'll have pancake mixtures available if we have enough seed. You never know what your harvest is till you get it. So we'll give that a whirl on eBay if it pops up.
What an idea. What a great idea, John. I hope it all works really well. All right, that's a great episode. Thank you very much, John. Look, I just wonder if I could get you quickly to talk about your new video that's on World Organic News and is now available.
That would be the Why No Dig Gardening.
That's the one, yeah.
Yeah, go for your life. Just go to worldorganicnews.com. It's there on the front page and explains why no dig gardening is important, or no tillage if you're on a much bigger scale. It links back to climate change and what we've been doing to soil for the last, 70 years.
Yes.
So there was an article I read, I think might have even done a podcast on it, that did a third of US corn belt has no topsoil, they're growing in subsoil. Let's go back to some buckwheat and some field peas and field bean.
It's a time bomb, isn't it? It's a time bomb. I see this when I live out in the country, as you know, John, and during the drought, we still had farmers that were ploughing the land, and you could see the clouds that were coming up, and this was the famous dust storms that happen. This is all topsoil. Yeah. This is what they grow into, and I thought, well, why are you doing that? But no, it seems to be such a tradition.
Yeah, there's also a thing called recreational tillage.
The
neighbours on the tractor I should be. But equally, in a drought, it might be the only thing that keeps some people from losing their stuff. So important, routines and whatnot. But we need to get away from tillage. And the way to grow food without tillage has been established. It's since the 60s. And the equipment for it's much better now than it was even 20 years ago. So it's all doable. Otherwise, we're just going to have more of these wildfires and floods and cold snaps. And
yes, maybe we could talk about that in another episode, John.
Yeah, it's all interconnected, Rich.
Interconnected. Okay. Fantastic. That was really interesting thoughts to finish with. It's a great episode. Thank you for your time, John. Thank you very much for listening. I appreciate it. We'll be back soon with another episode of Regen Earth.
Yeah, thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.